just want to get into this one and just get it out of the way. Alright. Well, we're nearing the end of the countdown to the individual Friendship is Magic seasons. And we are at the second to last season. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. I think everybody knows my feeling towards Season 8. Everybody in the fandom has agreed that this is the season that is, without a doubt, the worst season of the entire show. Because Season 8 is riddled with problems between character inconsistencies and generally just incredible piss-poor writing. Like, you want to know how bad Season 8 is? Literally, about half the episodes of this list I either think are mediocre at best or downright abysmal at worst. And this season houses some of the show's worst episodes out of all 9 seasons. Like, I'm not even kidding. There's only about half the episodes of this season that I really do like from this season. And that's not a good thing. So whereas seasons like Season 4, I can only think of like 3 episodes that I really don't like at all. There's about 10, 11, almost 12 episodes in Season 8 I either can't stand or have utter hatred for. So let's just get into it. We're nearing the end of the individual seasons and then we'll do the overalls, but let's just get into it. The top 24 My Little Pony Friendship is Magic Season 8 episodes. Number 24, Marks for Efforts. I am honestly shocked that this episode isn't any more hated than it already should be. I am surprised that everybody gives this episode a pass and don't think that it's as bad. This was the episode that made me feel legitimate disgust. Probably for the longest time, not since Princess Spike, was I just disgusted with the episode. It was also the first episode where I basically ranted on my Instagram about it, and it was basically one of those episodes where I literally wanted to scream to the writers, to quote DB's Abridged Trunks, "What the hell is wrong with you?" Because that's what... So let's just count the ways to explain why I think Marks for Efforts is not only the worst episode of Season 8, but for a while, I consider it to be the worst episode of the entire show, to the point where I threw my hands up and wanted to quit the show. Not entirely, but let's count the ways. The Cutie Mark Crusaders wanted desperately to be a part of the Friendship School, even though they've already are attending Miss Cheerilee's school, don't show any appreciation for Miss Cheerilee, and on top of that, they're basically acting like their Season 2 selves. Oh, that's already bad in and of itself, and the first half of the episode basically wastes our time, but the show gets a lot of missed potential with the introduction of our now new villain, Cozy Glow, who we basically thought had ulterior motives as there were signs. But the thing that absolutely makes me hate this episode is Twilight's character assassination. The thing that I hate most is the fact that Twilight Sparkle falsely accuses the CMNC for making Cozy Glow fail on purpose, all the while not thinking for a second that the Cutie Mark Crusaders wouldn't do something like this, was on a friendship episode mission with them 6 episodes prior and knows how they operate. And the most damning thing of all is that even after Cozy exposes them, Twilight doesn't even bother to give the Cutie Mark Crusaders an apology. And then all of a sudden, the Cutie Mark Crusaders are now tutors at the Friendship School. This was the moment that I literally lost all respect for this episode. The fact that this episode goes out of its way to basically villainize everybody and pull off not just any simple character assassination, the character assassination of the main character of your show. This is one of those moments where literally the writers were giving a double fuck you to the audience, especially to the viewers that were having watching the show for the longest time. I am legitimately shocked that nobody else has talked about this moment more than I have. I I hated this episode with every fiber of my being, and we're supposed to believe that the Cutie Mark Crusaders should be proud to be part of the Friendship School, even after the main six were acting like a bunch of out-of-character assholes, and basically he encouraged, they rewarded their behavior. It's like, you know what? Get the fuck out of here with that bullshit. Don't even get me started on that. This episode literally made me hate Twilight Sparkle because of that final third act. So yeah, I've already ranted about this episode enough, and it's probably not going to be the last time I'm going to rant about it, but it's still bad. Some people will think this episode's mediocre. Well, I say they're babbling morons, and I think they need to be tied up in the chair and forced to watch the episode over and over and over again until they assign it the rating it deserves. So yeah, Marks for Efforts is the worst episode of Season 8. It's not an average episode, it's a piece of shit. Alright, number 23, A Matter of Principles. An episode that universally everybody in the fandom hates. I don't want to dive into this because there's a lot more hatred to go around, but let's be frank here. This was essentially the episode that made me think maybe it was a good idea to leave Discourse stoned and possibly have him killed, because that's how some of the reactions of the fandom was like. The fact that Discord acted like a perpetual child throughout the entire episode, throwing a fit when he was not being put in charge of the Friendship School and Starlight is put in charge, and yet Starlight ends up being the one to apologize and rewards Discord for his bratty behavior. As I said, that's the kind of shitty-ass moral that I would expect out of horrible kid shows like Peppa Pig or Caillou. So yeah, I really don't think I need to say what's already said about this episode. A Matter of Principles is abysmal, and it's no wonder why it's one of the worst episodes of the entire show. However, I do think it's better than Marks for Efforts, because at the very least, I was expecting the episode to be bad, because to be frank, Discord's writing is very inconsistent from episode to episode, so I really didn't know what to expect. Whereas Marks for Efforts, I expected more, especially when it's in the episode at the very least, and why this episode's not only number 23, is the fact that it didn't assassinate the main character of your show, and no, I am not letting that go. But that does not excuse all the other wrongdoings of this episode. Number 2, Non-Compete Clause, aka if it was Fall with Her Friends, except we made it shittier. Yeah, the whole Rainbow Dash and Applejack rivalry I would have thought would have been dropped by this point, but instead, the episode decides to redo Fall with Her Friends from Season 1, except have Rainbow Dash and Applejack put in innocent bystanders at risk. The only, as bad as this episode is, and the fact that a lot of the times I had to fast forward through it, because again, it felt like a retread of a Season 1 episode that was already good, but in Season 8's coat of paint. The only reason why I think this episode is better than both of Marks for Efforts and A Matter of Principles is that the Young Six were literally the only saving grace of the episode, because they were just about as frustrated as the audience was. But aside from that, this episode is still shit. I don't understand why they thought it was a good idea to retread an episode that was already done, and I could really care less. It is an abysmal episode. Number 21, The Mean Six. How do you make the return of Queen Chrysalis having doppelgangers of the Main Six? How do you make that episode make it not matter? The fact of the matter is, the Main Six were essentially just a discordant Hornet Main Six from the Return to Harmony two-parter about how all the main characters, for whatever reason, was hit in the head with the Idiot Six. The Main Six, outside of Evil Twilight, practically did absolutely nothing about the entire episode. They didn't try to mind game the Main Six, or just do what they did with the Psycho Rangers and Power Rangers in space, and not have that be the overarching story for the last couple episodes. And it ultimately didn't end up mattering because Queen Chrysalis makes herself look like the biggest idiot in Equestria and not think for 1 second that the Mean Six were going to try to take over, and then the Mean Six get defeated by the Tree of Harmony in a Deus Ex Machina, pretty much making it all pointless. That being said, I'm putting this higher than the last 3 episodes because alongside Non-Compete Clause, you could skip this episode and literally not miss anything, but I do think this episode's better than non-compete clause, because at the very least they tried to do something different with the mean six idea, even if it basically amounted to literally nothing. But this is an episode that is so pointless, you could literally skip it and not miss a goddamn thing. Number 20, Yak Sacks. I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking that I would put Yak Sacks as more as a bottom tier episode, but if I'm being perfectly honest, I really couldn't think which episode is worse. Honestly, outside of thinking Marks for Efforts is the absolute worst episode, the last 4 episodes could literally be interchangeable. Well, the only thing I liked about Yak Sacks was the fact that they didn't try to hide Pinky's, how the main six basically told Pinky straight up that her playing of the Ufinophone basically absolutely sucked. But essentially, Pinky pulled the Discord 4 episodes later and decides to act like a spoiled brat because she's not playing her favorite instrument, of which, by the way, this is the only episode where she does end up playing the instrument, and then she ends up dropping the entire thing. But then prior to that, she essentially makes her friends' lives a living hell, and she actually ends up forgetting the reason why her friends told her that she's not good in the first place. And then the acts say, oh, their playing is perfect, even though you have no experience whatsoever. It is literally, this is another episode where you want to scream to the writers, which concussion did you suffer that made you think any of this was a good idea? Oh, and by the way, Party of One, Friend Indeed, and Pinky Pride call, they want their good character development back. So yeah, this is literally, I know a lot of people say that this is one of the worst episodes of the entire show, and it is certainly a bad episode. At the very least, I didn't feel like I was losing any sleep over it. But yeah, I'm not giving Yak Sacks any more of a pass than it already is. I still think it is utter garbage. Number 19, a rock hoof in a hard place. Basically, the stupid lost to time relic of basically rock hoof not fitting into the society of Equestria, even though the other pillars were able to do that just fine. And then, of course, the horrible allegory for suicide, of which at the time, the suicides of both Jason David Frank and Twitch were still fresh in my mind, so I was certainly not happy about that. And I will give the episode this. I am at least keeping it out of the bottom 5, because at the very least, Yona was once again the only saving grace for Ace, as she was basically the one who essentially encouraged Rockhoof to not get himself become petrified and turn to stone, and becomes Equestria's Tails Keeper, whatever the title is. But quite honestly, it is a title that is so meaningless that it does not affect anything, and essentially makes Rockhoof still jobless. Honestly, I know some people like this episode, but honestly, it was just a dumb episode. But at the very least, it didn't anger me compared to the bottom 5. Number 18, Flame Shields Up, The Washout. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't like this episode at all. Okay, well, compared to the other episodes, I didn't hate it as much. I like the idea about Lightning Dust's return, since Lightning Dust was one of those characters that fans have been wanting to see again since her introduction in Wonderbolt Academy back in Season 3, and wanted to know what happened to her after that. And we got the answer, and I was not happy with the final third act. Now look, up until the last third of the act, the first 2 acts were actually really good. To see Scootaloo be expanded upon and not just focus on her relationship with Rainbow Dash, but basically accepting the fact that she can't fly, and seeing Rainbow Dash become wanting to be the big sister for Scootaloo, it really shows good character development, and it showed how far the relationship had come since Sleepless in Ponyville. But what's keeping this episode more towards the bottom half of the list and out of the top 15 was the final third act, where basically Lightning Dust threw caution to the wind and had absolutely no problem of throwing a literal child in danger and was really willing to let her get hurt. That's why I like to believe that because Lightning Dust never came back after that episode, that the rocket that was tied up to her was basically careening towards the fucking sun, where she basically burned alive. Because that's how much of respect I lost for Lightning Dust after she pulled that crap. And I understand that was the point where basically the Lightning Dust formed the washouts, where it's basically the anti-Wonderbolts, where it's like, screw the rules, we're going to do whatever we want, no matter how dangerous it is. But when you're putting a literal child in danger, I'm surprised that the washouts weren't basically arrested and broken up for almost basically putting in child endangerment. So yeah, while I know there are people that like this episode, this was an episode that I couldn't fully get into. Call it a love-hate relationship. It was really only that last third that really angered me so much. But at the very least, it was only from a side character and not the main character. Let's move on before I continue to make this into another diatribe about marks for efforts. Number 17, Friendship University. Honestly, this was actually one of the few times where, basically, as much as it angers me, the Flim and Flam brothers was actually one of the few schemes where it wasn't like they were doing necessarily anything outright evil, even though, honestly, getting basically accredited by a racist pony, who we're going to get to later on the list, raises a couple of red flags, considering that basically the Flim Flam brothers got accredited from either a racist liar or a lying racist. But either way, I did like how Twilight was willing to risk her reputation to expose the Flim Flam brothers' plans to expand, even though their plan wasn't necessarily all that evil compared to their past schemes. However, what I am going to hold this episode for was the fact the Flim Flam brothers were willing to go out of their way to blackmail Twilight into keeping quiet, to pull all this stunt. But I do like the fact that Rarity actually ends up becoming more of a disguisee and is able to trick the Flim Flam brothers, even though Flim and Flam were able to see it through Twilight's disguise. And Rarity was honestly the best part about the entire episode. But yeah, this is another one of those episodes that I really just couldn't get into in spite of its placement. Number 16, The End and Friend. Basically, this is another been there, done that episode with Rarity and Rainbow Dash, basically kind of doing what Rarity investigates, only without the cool mystery novel aspect. It is basically the stupid misunderstanding how two friends who don't have a lot in common all of a sudden start to hate each other, and then the adventure forces them to go back together. Honestly, I've seen this trope so many times that I literally could care less what happens in this episode. Honestly, what keeps this episode honestly higher than the other episodes I mentioned on this list is the fact that the episode does the adventure aspect itself, when Rarity and Rainbow Dash aren't bickering, was actually pretty engaging, and I like the fact that the school actually has a secret passageway, kind of exploring how the school operates since its opening. But yeah, The End and Friend is basically another one of those been there, done that episodes where basically I really could care less what happens because I've seen that trope in episodes so many times. And it's better than the other episodes, but it's still not a good episode. Number 15, Father Knows Beast. Alright, let's get the big one out of the way. As I said in the review, in spite of my anger towards this episode, I like the idea of what this episode could have done, where it could have finally addressed the Spike's backstory and essentially find out who his parents were with the introduction of Sludge. And then the episode basically falls flat on its face with Sludge basically emotionally manipulating Spike into doing whatever he wants, and the last song of the season being sung by this smug asshole. And on top of that, the episode also basically points out all the plot holes that Sludge basically showed, and essentially proving that he is a lying scumbag that I wish would have died a brutal, murderous death. And even more so, I kind of wish that he would have gone to Tartarus for all the crap that he pulled. However, what I am putting this episode higher than the others, in spite of my hatred for Sludge, is the fact that Smolder was actually a very strong supporting character for Spike in all this role. And while I am not only forgiving of Spike, especially with his conversations of Twilight, and because of the pacing seems awkwardly fast that you don't feel any of the emotional weight behind the episode, you just don't feel sorry for him until you actually do, because of Smolder, who again was practically one of the few saving graces of the episode. Now, in spite of all that, I can't really fully hate this episode like some others, because I think this episode heart was in the right place, and I like the idea and the whole backstory it definitely seemed interesting, even though at the end of the day it was a complete and total lie. So honestly, I just think for me, Father's Knows Beast is kind of a love-hate thing with me. Number 14, the Mod couple. Really, I cannot really think of anything that I haven't really said about this episode. Just the fact that they made a Sheldon pony, and Sheldon Cooper is not really a character I really have any fanfare over, because I am not the fan of that type of character. It really also doesn't help the fact that I basically felt like I wanted to shoot myself in the face every time Mudbriar was on screen. He was that abysmal. Now, in spite of that, I am putting this episode here because I like the idea, basically, that it basically shows that in a couple, no matter how opposite they may seem, you could tell that Maud and Mudbriar do have love for each other, and while Pinky doesn't get it at first, I think in a way this episode was kind of an allegory of basically kind of showing kind of how I was with Maud when she was first introduced, where Pinky was essentially me, where I just didn't get Pinky's relationship with Maud, and yet Pinky was able to understand wholeheartedly. So I did like that aspect, and in a way the episode kind of works. But like I said, what's barely keeping this episode in the top 15 is the fact that every time that Sheldon Cooper's on screen, I really just do not find that sense of humor funny, and I literally felt like I wanted to die inside. Alright, moving on. Number 13, Fake It Till You'll Make It. Basically, this is another rip-off episode where basically this was Simple Ways, but not as shitty, because I do like the fact that Fluttershy does try to come out of her shell and try to adopt these personas to run Rarity's boutique, in Manhattan, until she ends up basically pulling off 3 personalities. I think in the actual review I made a mistake because I've only talked about 2 of them. The 3rd personality that she got was kind of a goth emo personality, and while she basically tried to be the snooty upright that ultimately got the raccoons out, literally the influencer persona really made me want to shoot myself in the face, because I do not stand those types of people, because I am not a big thing on influencers, and I literally wanted to chew my own ears off every time I had to hear something an influencer would say. Now, I'm only putting this in the top 13. Quite honestly, I honestly was going to put this episode higher, but because it's another one of those been there, done that episodes, I really wanted to fast forward a lot of the stupid stuff so I really could just get to the end, just so Fluttershy can learn yet the same thing that she's already learned. And I was willing to give leeway on that since Season 7, but after Season 8, I'm over it. Alright, number 12, Road to Friendship. I don't know what to think with this episode. I think this episode basically kind of does show more the complexities of Starlight and Trixie's relationship. I guess really honestly, they do acknowledge the fact that they kind of explore more of their faults, so I will give it this so that we see both Starlight and Trixie's frustrations as compared to all bottled up. So I will give this episode that. But the stalker pony that's been practically stalking them almost the entire episode, and him being kind of a condescending prick, where I literally want to smack him in the face and say, you know what, fuck off. Now, with that being said, the journey itself was honestly not all that bad. I liked the first half of the episode, and on top of that, I did find the journey to be somewhat entertaining, at least for the first half. But honestly, I think because once we start the bickering, you kind of know where it goes, because you've already seen this countless times that you just want to fast forward through everything. So yeah, it's still a better episode, but I don't know, I don't know, I think this episode's mediocre at best. Number 11, Horseplay. I think with this episode, I like the idea of it. Seeing Celestia actually trying to be an actress and failing miserably is kind of sad and funny at the same time. And I do like we get our classic Twilight freakout once again, even if it comes at the cost of hurting her teacher. Now, I do like the fact that Twilight does own up to this, and we see that Celestia could potentially be one of the biggest trolls in Equestria. So you can get some enjoyment out of it. but at the same time, it's not really something to write home about, because this is another one of those episodes where you want to be kind to your friends, no matter how bad they are at something that they do, you want to encourage them. It's like we've already seen this 1,000 times, but at the very least, it wasn't Yak Sacks. Alright. So as you could probably tell from my frustration, pretty much, as you can tell, literally over half the episodes on this season are either mediocre or downright abysmal, some of the show's worst. The top 10, I think, honestly, is really easy to pick out, because the top 10 episodes on my list for the season are really the only 10 episodes from the season I actually like. So yeah, that's really sad. I can literally count all the good episodes of season 8 literally on both of my hands. That's how bad the season is. So hopefully now that I've vented some frustration, let's actually talk about the 10 episodes I actually like. Number 10, Granny's Gone Wild. Honestly, this was just an interesting take on the Golden Girls, and we see Granny Smith and all of her friends try to be seductive. It's kind of hilarious in my book. And I do like a lot of the meta humor where Rainbow Dash has this Applejack cloud conscience, and just the Applejack conscience near the end of the episode being like, do I even need to say anything? But I do like how Granny Smith tries to tell Rainbow Dash that she doesn't have to be like Applejack, and that they do like to have a good time, and that they like Rainbow Dash, and they like her who she is. It's honestly a very interesting take, and I really do like that aspect of the episode. So yeah, despite how icky the title can be, Granny's Gone Wild is honestly very good. Again, I would think you would change the title, but it's still a good episode nonetheless. Number 9, Surf and/or Turf. Or basically the first Cutie Mark Crusader episode that's actually called on by the map, where they go to Mount Aries, which is one of the locations that was shown after the movie. And I think, honestly, I really do like the episode, as it kind of addresses the conflict that a lot of kids face about having to choose between parents who are divorced and having to go from one location to another. And I do like how the Cutie Mark Crusaders can't come to an agreement, because Sweetie Belle likes all the positive sides of things of being at Mount Aries, while basically Scootaloo likes the positive aspect of being Sequestria. And basically, it causes some really good conflict that honestly raises a lot of questions that I think kids would be able to understand, especially when they have parents that are going through a divorce and you don't know how to process it. And I think Silverstream's brother is in that dilemma, but I really think the episode kind of gets to the point where it's like, your parents still love you no matter what, and no matter where they are, you can still have time to kind of basically spend time with both of them. And I think in a way, that part of the episode is a success. Number 8, Sounds of Silence. I really love this episode. Outside of the climax of the episode, which we'll get into, what I like about this episode is that it expounds upon yet another new race, the Kieran. And essentially, as I said, this was essentially the episode that made All Bottled Up from last season completely obsolete, as do the Kieran's Tale song, which, by the way, is the catchiest as hell song of the season, basically showing the Kieran's backstory, and they have two different forms, where essentially they have an anger form that they don't know how to control themselves, and the only way they could do it is essentially get rid of all emotion. One thing that I am going to hold this episode for, and what's keeping it out of the top 5 and being one of my favorite episodes of the season, is that the fact that the Kieran were willing to butt in on the Fluttershy and Applejack's argument, even though it's not really any of their business, and essentially they were trying to help them. I understand that it was their village, but it's like, it's none of your fucking business, so why don't you back the hell off? And the fact that their only way was to throw Applejack and Fluttershy into the silence pond thing was their only solution. It's like, that's basically kind of a dictatorship. But obviously the character that reminds me of Dory from Finding Nemo, which, yeah, I can't think of the character's name off of short-term memory, was definitely a breath of fresh air. But like I said, what makes this episode great, obviously, is the moral. Essentially, it basically shows you that anger is essentially a part of our emotions, but it's how you control that anger and how you use it is what is going to help you understand emotions in the long run. And as I said, this was basically the episode that officially made All Bottled Up completely obsolete. So yeah, I really do like this episode a lot. Number 7, School Days. The season 8 premiere that honestly showed a promising start. Even though it did kind of give the plot hole where basically Celestia said in the series premiere that, you couldn't learn friendship you couldn't really learn friendship through a school, and then Twilight basically set aside, oh, you can learn friendship in a school. I also like the introduction of the Young Six, and to see what their characters were going to be like. And I really also like the fact that the episode is very humorous. And even though I am not a huge fan of him, Chancellor Naysay, I gotta admit, definitely did set up a perfectly good conflict. And I think, let's be honest here, this is probably one of the few times that the show actually does address racism, and it doesn't come off as preachy. As I've mentioned about the season is Generation 5 movie where it just constantly repeats that racism is bad. However, in spite of how much of an asshole, racist piece of shit Naysay is, he did serve his purpose as a two-parter, and I like how Starlight is the one to get Twilight back on her hooves and realize that there were all different kinds of friendship that can be taught. And basically try to shove it into Naysay's bigoted, narrow-minded mindset and to tell him to stick it where the sun don't shine. So honestly, this season opener kind of showed a lot of promise to this season that I kind of wish was there. But yeah, it was a solid season opener. Number 6, The Parent Map. Probably one of the most relatable episodes other than Parental Guidance, because basically seeing the friendship map called both Sunburst and Starlight to go to their old village and spend time with their parents. Honestly, I think this is probably a moral that I think everybody can relate to, because you love your parents very much, but you're trying to be very sensitive towards them, but you want to see them, you want to cultivate that relationship, because the sad reality is your parents are not going to be here forever. That's the sad reality. And this episode basically shows that Starlight and Sunburst, are basically grown ponies, and their parents are able to realize that, but Starlight and Sunburst have to learn that their parents will still love them no matter what. And I think this is honestly a great moral that, I think teens have to kind of relate to, that, your parents do mean well, and, they'll support you no matter what. But you also have to be assertive and let them know that, you're growing up. So I think in that sense, I think this episode kind of succeeds in that episode. In that aspect. Because the episode's very good. I'll give that. So I like the Parent Map a lot. Number 5, Mttown. Basically the episode that shows Spike not only metaphorical development as far as his character's going, until it got ruined in Father Knows Beast, but essentially this is the episode that basically caused Spike to grow his wings. I don't really need to say what else I can say about the episode. The action was very exciting, learning more lore about the dragons and basically learning what the molt is, and seeing what Spike had to go through to finally grow wings, show that Spike is growing up and he's becoming more of a grown adult dragon compared to being the baby dragon that we've known since season 1. So, yeah, it is just an all-around exciting episode that honestly I think has to be seen. Number 4, The Breakup Breakdown. Basically, the episode that teaches you about communications and not just friendships, but communications and relationships. The second episode, a part of the Big Mac Sugar Bell story arc, and seeing basically the misunderstanding of basically Big Mac overhearing that Sugar Bell wants to break up with him, but through actual reasons that are actually funny in the episode, we see the two of them, despite those rough patches and those miscommunications, I do like that Big Mac and Sugar Bell were able to work out their differences, and we do see how much they care for one another, and saying that the relationship was really genuine development, and they were just adorable all around because you wanted to see them go through their problems. And I think the episode does succeed about that in that aspect. If I was to nitpick, my only complaint about this episode that I am going to give this episode a hard time for, It's a B-plot revolving around the Cutie Mark Crusaders trying to find Sweetie Belle's secret admirer when we know the pie was meant for Sugar Belle. Honestly, I get where the B-plot was going, where it's like, even if you're single, only if your friends are your Valentine or whatever, you know, that still counts for something. But quite honestly, as I said in the review, you could literally cut that whole B-plot out of the episode and literally miss nothing. But aside from that, the Breakup Breakdown is still a very great episode. Number 3, What Lies Beneath. Basically the episode that basically not only expanded upon the friendship school, expanding more of what the Tree of Harmony does, and essentially testing the young six about all their fears of how all their fears are basically being put to the test. Where Gallus is basically claustrophobic, Silverstream has massive PTSD from the Storm King from the movie, Yona is arachnophobic, Smolder doesn't want to affect it, she likes execute things. Basically, Ocellus doesn't want to have a guilt conscious over being, well, basically a former changeling to the former evil queen of the changelings, and Sandbar doesn't want to let down the ponies that he looks up to, but each and every one of them are able to overcome it through their friendship. And the Tree of Harmony essentially putting them to the test about that to show them that they can learn friendship. And as I said, for Gallus, you did learn friendship from a tree. And on top of that, the ending of the episode gives very heavy, ominous foreshadowing. And it is a great, great episode. Number 2, School Raise. Honestly, I didn't really know what to expect of this finale, and as I said, the whole twist of Cozy Glow actually being a villain, honestly, I will fess up, I was kind of spoiled a bit through Equestria Daily, through, well, social media. However, I just still found it surprising that this Darla Dimple-esque pony had this facade, had this honestly very ingenious plan, and for a while, I thought her to be my favorite villain, mostly because of the fact that this is a child that is doing all of this. And just seeing this Darla Dimple-esque pony not only being able to team up with Tyrek, and almost in succeeding in achieving her plans, even though her plans don't really fully make sense if you really think about it a whole lot. But honestly, the fact that she was this close to achieving it is honestly kind of impressive. And on top of that, seeing that the young six are the one that ultimately have to save the day, where they have to rely on their friendship when all-powerful rulers are basically either isolated or captured, that they have to be the ones to save the day. And also to see Chancellor Naysay's racist, bigoted remarks finally come back to bite him in the ass was honestly all the more gratifying. And while I am not as high-strung on Naysay, and now, after the next season, it took me a while to get past it. But like I said, seeing Cozy Glow basically show him that ponies can do wrong and not just other races, and basically put his bigoted racist remarks in place, basically showed that karma finally got up to him. And to see Cozy Glow face actual consequences and getting locked up in Tartarus was honestly also all the more gratifying. Honestly, it was a great finale that honestly is a lot better when you think about it, and it honestly got me excited for the last season. But let's get to number 1. But before that, let's just quickly go over the Best Gift Ever special. Honestly, I think because of how solid the episode is, I'd probably say if I was kind of the Best Gift Ever special as part of Season 8, I'd probably put it in like the top 6. So I'd say the Best Gift Ever would be the official number 6 if I were to include it. Alright, so with that out of the way, let's just get into it. You already know what my favorite episode of the Season 1 is. The number 1 best episode of Season 8, The Heartswarming Club. I love this episode so much. Not only is it kind of a fun type of mystery of who basically ruined the Heartswarming Eve tree, but to learn all the different races of how they each celebrate Heartswarming Eve, even though admittedly Sandbar's story is honestly the least interesting of the 6, but seeing how all the different races celebrate Heartswarming Eve, or their own version of Heartswarming Eve, as they're each basically talked about one-on-one, but honestly, Gallus was without a doubt the best character, and that he was the one that showed the most growth. When he saw his friends fight and argue argue over who basically ruined the tree, it was him that owned up to the fact that, you know, he did it because the young six are essentially the closest thing that he has to family, and that in Griffinstone, he doesn't really have a family. And just seeing that scene, finding out that the only holiday, the Blue Moon Festival, is the only time where the Griffins have to be kind of nice to each other, but seeing Gallus not really have any type of family to call his own just breaks my heart, and you want to give the poor kid a hug. And to see how the Young Six had learned friendship lessons in the 15 episodes prior to this, it showed that they were without a doubt the best part of the season, and why I thought that Gallus is one of my favorite characters of not just the Young Six, but my favorite character of one of my favorite characters of the entire show. And just to see them, the Young Six, be willing to stay behind to be with Gallus and give up their hearts-warming Eve shows how strong their friendship is. Honestly, the Heartswarming Club is a solid episode. It is so amazing, and I really just find it even more hilarious that it succeeds one of the show's worst episodes by comparison, but it is honestly an all-around feel-good episode, and that's why I think the Heartswarming Club is the best episode of Season 8. Alright, that was a rough one. As I said, it's really sad that the only good episodes in the season I really could count off both of my hands, because the bottom 12, the top 10 episodes are really the only episodes I really fully enjoyed. The other episodes on this list, the other 12, I either found either mediocre or just straight up awful, and one of the show's worst episodes in the entire show. So it's literally no coincidence why I agree with the fandom and why I think Season 8 is the worst season of the entire show, when about over half the episodes on this list are either okay or downright abysmal. But we have one more season left, and we're going to count down every episode of our final season, and then I'm going to go through all the positives and negatives and count down my 20 least favorite and my 20 favorite episodes. But before we can get to those last two, let's round up the show one last time. So next time, we are going to be counting down the top 24 episodes of our final season, Season 9. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.